In this lecture, we're going to learn about nested loops. And these are loops that look like this. Here we are using an example of a for loop, but you see that we have two nested layers. The outer loop is going to be looping over rows, and the inner loop is going to be looping over cols, which is really a representation of columns. So you can do something like this, and when you have a series of loop nested two times like this, what you're going to be really representing or manipulating is a 2D data structure. And with this, you can, for example, represent tabular data. So this is really all nested loops are about. You're going to be nesting them inside each other if your application requires you to do something like this. So let's go through this and see how it could work. Okay, here we have a simple example of a one-level loop, which is going to represent one-dimensional data. So here we have our collection, which is, for example, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is something we could represent or manipulate with one layer of a loop like we have here. But the moment we start representing something like two-dimensional or a tabular data, we're going to need a two-dimensional or a series of loops that are nested two times. And this is going to start by executing the outer layer of the loop. For example, row is going to start at 0. We're going to go in here and see that row is less than 0. So we're going to fall inside the loop here. Once we go inside, column is going to be 0. The test is going to be true because 0 is less than 3. We're going to fall inside, we're going to execute whatever is in here, we're going to increment, come again, test and print until the test here fails. And if the test fails, we're going to execute another iteration of the outer loop. So we're going to increment row is going to become 1, we're going to do the test, and we're going to go in again. And this is going to go on until we have no more rows to do some computation on, or if the outer test here fails, and we're going to fall outside the outer loop here. We have done this example using a for loop. If we run this program, we should get an output like this, which is basically going to be printing tabular data. But what we just put in here is the row count and the column count, which is what we print on this line here. We can also do the same thing using while loops, and this is how one might do it. Again, we're going to have an outer loop, which is going to loop over rows. We're going to have an inner loop, which is going to loop over columns, and it is basically going to keep going. And we have done everything possible for our loop here to work. You see, we have the initializers or the iterators declared outside. Inside, we have the tests, and after we run our code inside the while loop, we're going to increment the row count so that the outer loop would keep working and moving forward. Inside the loop, we're going to print the row and the column. I don't really need to explain this because we have done this a couple of times. But one thing worth noticing is that we are setting the width on the row information and setting the width on the column information. And here I made a typo. I said set width. It is set W like this. But we're going to correct this when we hit Visual Studio Code. The main message here is that we are setting the width on this row and column information here so that they occupy the space of 2 digits. And this is going to help show things nicely. And you're going to see what could happen if we didn't that when we get to Visual Studio Code. The main message is that we are representing a nested loop here, and it is nested at 2 levels. We have an outer loop, and inside we have another loop. And this can be used to represent two-dimensional tabular data, for example. We can also do the same thing with do-while loops, and it is exactly the same. We have our iterator, we have our test at the end, and inside we do whatever it is we need to do. And after we do that, we're going to increment our iterator so that the loop moves forward. And that's the same thing we're doing for this inner loop here. You see, we print out the row and column information, and we increment the column so that we can move on to the next iteration of this loop. It is also possible to represent 3D data structures using loops like this, and you're going to nest 2 levels of loops, and you're going to be able to do that. But if you have more dimensions than 3, then the data is really not easy to visualize, in the 3D world that we live in. But it is possible to do that. And if your application requires that, you can even have 10 dimensions, and it is going to work pretty well. But for now, we're going to play with two-dimensional data structures and use two nested layers of loops to really see this in action. For now, we're going to head over to Visual Studio Code and play with us. Okay, here we are in Visual Studio Code. This is our working folder. The current project is nested loops, so we're going to grab our template files, as we always do, and we're going to put them inside our project, and we're going to open our project in Visual Studio Code. Let's do that. Let's open up main CPP, and we're going to remove all this clutter here. Let's bring this up a little bit, and we are going to go down and put in the code to represent our data using for loops, and it is a two-dimensional data structure that we're going to show. We're basically going to show tabular data showing row and column information in each cell. So you see everything is not really visible here, so we're going to click on this file icon and hide this pane here so that we have a better chance of seeing everything here. And we have a problem because we haven't IO manip included, which is going to give us access to std set width here. So let's do that. We're going to include that, and we're going to remove this thing that says set width. We don't have such a thing. It is set W like this, and it should work. So here we have an outer loop, which is going to loop over rows. We have an inner loop, which is going to loop over columns, and we're going to print column information. For now, I want you to show one thing. So we're going to take out this set W2 here and remove that. And we're going to remove that again here. And we're going to try and run the application so that you can see why we need these things. So try to think about this application and how it's going to work. It is really a good exercise to go through it and try to really see how the C++ runtime is going to go through it running your code here. It is a good way to try and understand things. Once you have that done, we can start running it. We're going to bring up a terminal, and we are going to build with GCC like we usually do. The build is going to go through, and if we'll run this, we're going to get our data printed out on the console here. And you see we have row 0, column 0, row 0, column 1, but this is really cramped. It is not easy to see. So what we're going to do, we can try and put a space after this so that cells are separated. That's a thing we can try to do. So let's run the task to build with GCC, and we are going to clear and run Rooster. And you see now that it is a little better, but here on row 10, you see that things are pushed over. And the reason is, now we have two digits here. We had one digit, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but now we have two digits, 10, and this is pushing things over, and it is really not easy to follow your data like this. So that's why we're going to take this back and say we want the number to print here to take up the place of two digits, regardless of if the number actually has two digits or not. And we're going to do that using our manipulator std set W or set width. And we're going to say we want two digits. That's why we say it here. And we're going to put another output stream operator. And we're going to do the same thing for a column. And again, this says we want this number we're going to print here to take up the place of two digits in the terminal. That's what this chunk of code here is going to tell stdc out. And we want to do the same thing for column here. So we're going to say std set W, and we're going to pass in a 2, and we're going to put another output stream operator, and this is going to do what we want now. If we build again, we're going to run the task to build with GCC, and the build is going to be good. And if we run Rooster, we're going to see data printed out in a really good way. I think we can also put our space to separate things a little bit. And we're going to build again with GCC. And we're going to go down. And we're going to click in the terminal here and clear. Let's type clear property. And we're going to run Rooster. And now things are better and it is easy to see. You can see that we are able to print a two-dimensional data structure on the console. And this may come in handy if you need to do something like this. And again, we are going to run the outer loop. It is going to run row is 0. We're going to do the test here. And the test is going to be successful. So we're going to jump in here. We're going to run the inner loop. Column is going to be 0. We're going to do the test. 0 is going to be less than a 3 that we have in here. So we're going to fall in here. And we're going to print whatever data we currently have in row and column. And for the first time, row is going to be 0 and column is going to be 0. And we're going to get this cell here. After we do this, we are going to increment column. The loop is going to run again. Column is going to be 1 at this time. 1 is going to be less than 12. We're going to fall in here and we're going to print whatever information we have. Now row is 0 and column is 1. So we're going to print this line here. And we are going to increment column again. We're going to get to column 2. We're going to do the test. We're going to go in and we're going to print this line here, column 2. Now we should be done with whatever column information we have. And things are going to keep going until we print all the rows that we have in here. And the last one is going to be row 11, column 2. And we're going to print that. Please try to go through this and you're really going to understand. This is how you can do something like this using for loops. You can do the same thing using while loops. So we're going to comment this code out because we don't want to have noise when we try to do the other loop constructs. And we're going to go down and do the same thing using while loop. So we're going to say while loop and we're going to put in the code. It is exactly the same logic. And we have commented out our row and column information. So we're going to take this and bring it out of our comment section here. And if we go down, we should see that this now works. So we have our iterators declared here because we are doing a while loop. We're going to do the outer loop, which is going to be iterating over rows, and the inner loop, which is going to be iterating over columns. We're going to do the same thing we did in the for loop, but here it's not set with, it is set W. And it is going to work if you run it. Again, try to go through this. It is going to print what you see here, but we should put our space so that things are spaced out a little bit. And if we build again with GCC, we're going to go up and we're going to clear. We're going to run Rooster. And you see that we have exactly the same type of information here. You can do the same thing with while loops. So next we're going to try do while loops and show you that you can do this. Again, if you don't want to type this code, the code is going to be available as a resource to this lecture. So make sure you check that out. You can copy that, put that in here and really start learning from this. We can also do the same thing using do while loops. So let's put the code in here. And we have our size t variables commented out here. No big deal, we can declare them here. We're going to say size t row and say size t column. And it is really exactly the same thing. The only thing we need to do is make sure we have set W here and not set width. And we're going to have our iterators declared. We're going to do the outer loop, which is going to be looping over rows. We're going to do the inner loop, which is going to be looping over columns. And we're going to print the same piece of information we have been printing all along. And when we are done doing whatever we want to do inside the body of the loop, we're going to increment our iterator. And we do the same thing for the outer loop here. And if you run this, you're going to get exactly the same result. So let's put a space here so that things are spaced out a little bit. We're going to bring up the terminal so that we have some breathing room. We are going to build with GCC as we always do. The build is going to go through. We are going to clear. Let's clear. And if we run this, we're going to get our data printed out. So you can see that all these loop constructs really do the same thing. And sometimes it's going to be a matter of preference which you choose. I personally favor the for loop because I think it's more compact. But that's a preference. You can use whatever you want. Use whatever makes sense for whatever project you are working on. And this is really all we set out to do in this lecture. I hope you have a clear idea of what nested loops do. The more layers of nests you have, The higher the dimension of the data you're going to be trying to represent or manipulating, and you should be aware of this. We are going to stop here in this lecture. In the next one, we're going to learn about break and continue. Go ahead and finish up here and meet me there.